These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast. This episode of the Six Ranch Podcast is brought to you by Defend Security Cameras. Well, one of my great goals in life is to try to provide people with enough information so that we get fewer wounded animals in the woods from archery equipment and from rifle equipment and everything else. I think as hunters, we should always be trying to be a little bit more lethal and a little bit more ethical. And I see those things hand in hand. I was sitting down this morning with Dr. Ed Ashby, who has probably done the most comprehensive research on archery lethality that's ever been conducted. Sir, good morning to you. And are you aware of anybody who's done a more comprehensive test than you?
There's not any test that I know of being done with live animals, which is really the only valid way you can test. And you have to do a massive amount of it. Troy's doing some with pigs, but not focused like mine was on finding necessarily the most lethal arrow system.
What started the question for you?
Well, I didn't get my first compound bow till about 1981, I think it was, or 80. Yeah, it must have been 80. And the first year I hunted with it, and I bought into everything I could read, what the manufacturers were saying, and I went with very light arrows, as light as I could get at the time. There weren't any mechanical broadheads, but I went with replaceable blade, multi-blade heads. And I was living in Minnesota at the time, working on the Indian reservation there. And I hit 4 deer that year that I failed to recover. Now, I had never done that before. So I started collecting data just for myself, trying to find out why there was something, because I had researched the data after that, because I came up as a rifle hunter too. Dad was a rifle instructor. And so I've shot rifles all of my life. And ballistics and so forth, terminal ballistics, were a very common conversation around the dinner table. And when I had questions about that, I could always research data and find all the studies that had been done. And when I started looking for information about terminal ballistics of arrows on animals, there wasn't any. So that when I started collecting, it was just for myself. And then by sheer good fortune, I got invited to participate in the Natal study in South Africa, which ended up getting the first affirmative bow hunting law ever in Africa, where it said you could actually hunt with a bow. Prior to that, the only place you could bow hunt, they were very limited, were countries that had no ways and means requirements.
Okay.
And Mozambique still has that today. You can go hunting with a slingshot if you want to.
Gotcha.
But, when I got involved in that, and like I said, it was just good fortune. I came away with a lot of data. We went into Makuzi Park before the call of the rifle call, because they have a limited space. They have to call a lot of animals every year because the habitat just won't support them. And they were doing this study to present to the Parks Board, or the Regulatory Commission, to try to legalize bow hunting if it was feasible. Well, they didn't know how it was going to come out. And I shot 154 animals in 30 days. And it's backed up with a rifle. These were all hunted animals. Nothing big, from border hog and impalas Biggest thing was a zebra. Second to that, what would have been next, I guess, would have been wildebeest in size. A lot of Ingala in there. So it was on regular size animals. And I was doing just terminal ballistics part of it. They were doing a lot of other things during the study. And I came away with a lot of questions. And so then I developed quite an expanded database of information where I was tracking 118 factors on every shot.
118 factors.
Yeah. And we've expanded that today because of all the new equipments on the market in the last 20 years. We're collecting just over 250 data points because you literally have to record everything about every factor. The equipment used, shot distance, shot angles, bones hit, everything, sharpness of the broadhead, every factor you could think of. Insert, shaft diameters, shaft wall thicknesses, everything. And so that's why it's expanded so much. But all through my studies, I collected 118 data points. And as I started, I looked for an animal that had heavy bone because that's your big barrier to overcome. Hitting a shoulder, a ball joint, something like that, head of the scapula. And the obvious came to mind was buffalo, because when they're in the primary position, the absolute straight, the ribs almost touch each other. And if they turn their body a little bit, there is a lip, a thick portion on the back of the forward rib and a groove in the rib behind it, and it actually overlaps. So you cannot shoot a buffalo without hitting a bone, even when he's in the primary position. The ribs are just too close together. So he was the logical choice. And I was living in Africa, had virtually unlimited access to buffalo. And so started testing on those. And as I started accumulating data, I realized that this was information that should be available to bow hunters. And so I started putting it together in both articles and study updates and talking about it on some of the archery chat sites. Not much of that because in Africa I didn't have much access to them, but when I would make a trip back to the States, I would try to post on here. And as Troy will tell you, when you get into this testing, every time you test, you come up with new questions. And my goal was to find the most lethal arrow system I could find. Now, one of the major factors that came out of the Tall study, and we had 2 veterinarians available, autopsy animals. The number one factor for a non-lethal shot was lack of penetration. If you took the course of the arrow and extended it, it would have been a lethal hit. And that's what they determined. So that's what I concentrated on. And out of the Tall study, we had 3 broadheads that outperformed everything else. I had 32 different broadheads in the test. And
what year was this, sir?
that was 1985 that we did the Tall study.
Okay.
And over half of the broadheads we tested failed right away.
Yeah.
Structural integrity. So we could eliminate them. And we kept narrowing it down. And when we got down to the 3 final broadheads, that's when we started working on the tougher animals, the wildebeest and the zebra. And the wildebeest, even though he's smaller in body size, is actually tougher and heavier bone than the zebra is. They have a reputation as the poor man's buffalo because they're darn hard to kill.
They're an incredibly tough animal, and
they certainly are.
They're weird too. They look like they're made out of spare parts. Now, I'm a huge fan of wildebeest.
That was God's leftovers. There may be a couple of other animals that Cheronooks and things that are that way too.
Yes, indeed.
But the 3 heads that were at the end, still undamaged, were the Ben Pearson deadhead, a head that was called the Maxi head, was made in Oklahoma, semi-custom. It was a 3-to-1 ratio. It had interrupter grooves in it, not serrated, but like Troy's putting on broadheads now. He may have discussed that with you. I don't know if he did or not. But it was slightly concave. And then there was the grizzly. At the time, the grizzly was the only single blade or single bevel broadhead made. It outperformed everything. But I had no idea why. That was one of the questions I had. So that was one of the things I was trying to research too, is why did it have significantly more post-breaching penetration than the other 2 heads?
Let's talk about this 3-to-1 aspect ratio real quickly, just for folks who are new to this, who might be building their first arrow systems. So when we talk about aspect ratio, we're basically talking about how steep the angle is of that broadhead.
Yes.
And with 3-to-1, that means in order to get an inch wide, we have to be 3 inches long. So that's the aspect.
Yes, and the grizzlies I was working with were the original Elbert grizzlies, which are longer than, what do they call it, the Kodiak that they make now. It was 1 1/8 inches by 3 3/8.
Wow, that's a piece of metal.
Yeah, it was the size of what the 300 grain original tough head. The exact same ratios.
Okay. And were we shooting aluminum shafts at this time?
We shot aluminum, fiberglass, because there were no carbon. Genuine fiberglass. What Shakespeare used to make, and wood shafts.
Okay. So one of the core principles that you came up with at the end of all this was about arrow integrity, and that if any portion of the broadhead or arrow system fails, that tends to arrest penetration. And if we've identified,
is the most important factor.
So
even if you have perfect arrow flight, if structural integrity fails, it stops or severely degrades any penetration you're going to get.
And that's very consistent with what I've found as a bow hunter and as a guide. If when I get that broadhead or arrow system back, if there's a break in anything, then the penetration gets arrested soon afterwards. So for folks out there listening, if when you're recovering your arrow and it's not still shootable, then you had some penetration loss because of whatever it is that broke as it went through that animal, or as it went into that animal. So we ideally want an arrow that comes out the far side that we can put back in our quiver, maybe sharpen up a little bit. Hopefully it's still sharp and be able to go hunt with again.
That's exactly the goal. And they would never give me credit for it, but I'm going to take credit for it. The fact that you've got brass and steel inserts and outserts are because of the work I did.
You've got 20 acres, and your security camera can see about 50 feet from your Wi-Fi router. Your gate, your barn, your equipment, all the places you actually need to monitor, they're exactly where your Wi-Fi doesn't reach. That's where Defend security cameras make a lot of sense. They work on cellular, just like your phone. But here's what's clever. They've got an embedded SIM card that automatically connects to the best network in your area. Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile. It finds whatever's strongest. No choosing providers, no contracts, no hassle. I'm using Defend cameras at my place. You mount it, open the Defend app on your phone, and you're done. 10 minutes. Clear footage, night vision, instant alerts, and here's something you need to know. Defend doesn't sell your data. Not to China, not to tech companies, not to anyone. They work for you, period. Defend your place. I think the entire aero market owes you a debt of gratitude, as do almost all bow hunters, just because you've influenced everyone in one way or another, whether they realize it or not. I mean, this was a giant body of work that changed archery forever. And a lot of people are incredibly resistant to change.
Yes, they are.
And I'm curious, sir, because I'm sure you've encountered more of this than I have. Why is it that you think people have a resistance to accepting a large data set that doesn't support their own opinion?
Well, the vast majority of that group are people, influencers, that's the word I was looking for, who are sponsored by the archery industry, who wants to sell you on velocity is everything so they can sell you a new bow.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a monetary aspect where influencers are getting paid to promote a specific style of shooting, and then followers are subscribing to that idea. But it's still confusing to me why people get so defensive and they really get their feelings hurt when you come and say, look, I've got all these data over here that indicate that if we make some of these changes to the system that you're shooting, that you'll get more penetration, and that penetration is the precursor to lethality. It's the most important thing we can get. In order to get that, we have to have all of these things, right? So if we kind of go down the list, we've got structural integrity. So nothing can break. That's number one. And then talk to me about why aeroflight is critical for penetration.
A number of reasons, but having perfect aeroflight, the whole concept of increasing air penetration is to conserve whatever force the arrow has, not squander it on things that don't help you with penetration. So perfect aeroflight has its force vector going as forward as it possibly can. There's going to be some shaft flex. So far, we can't get rid of shaft flex without going to a bullet.
Well, bullets have it too. It's just happening.
Yeah, it's so microscopic.
Yeah, it's happening at a higher frequency. Something that I would like to challenge people to go try, because almost anybody can do this. Go out and shoot a target a few times at 3 or 4 yards, and have a target that's got a very consistent type of stopping power, not a bag target, something like foam, and then back off and shoot it at, say, 18 yards. And I think what you'll find is that your 18-yard arrow actually penetrates a little farther because that arrow is stabilized and it's not in its Archer's paradox flexion stage. The faster we can get that arrow to stabilize, the better the penetration is going to be. But I find that on targets, including on animals, that penetration really suffers at these closer ranges because the arrow isn't driving straight forward. And now would probably be a good time to talk about the difference between kinetic energy and momentum, because this is still a major sticking point that archers get confused about.
Before I do that, let's go back to where you were.
Okay.
And high amounts of FOC, extreme and ultra extreme, give you such a huge boost in penetration because they come out of paradox quicker.
So let's talk about what FOC is, weight forward of center.
Yes. In true aeronautical terms, it's the difference between the center of mass and the center of pressure. Now, that's dynamic. It changes in flight as your air reflexes. When we're going to look at it with an arrow, they will actually shift some. What we use in archery and call FOC is a relative term, something we can use to make the same error again. That's basically all it is. But the way we would do it is measure where the balance point of the arrow is. Now that's static though, center of gravity. And then we would find the center of the arrow. And the distance between those, percent-wise, is the weight forward of center.
Okay. So a way that I like to try to explain this to people, which increasingly more, a lot of folks have never pulled a trailer, but if you were pulling a trailer in a vehicle and that trailer was heavier than the vehicle, you could pull it along as long as you were going straight. But as soon as you hit the brakes or there was some type of resistance to your vehicle that was pulling, then that trailer, which is heavier than you, is going to want to swing out to the side. And if we think about this from an arrow's perspective, if our weight is behind that cutting head, that broadhead, then it's going to want to pull the arrow off to the side. Now we've got 27, 28, 29 inches of sidewall friction that is really going to arrest that penetration. Would you agree with that analogy?
Yes. It's not exactly the same, but it's a good analogy that people can understand.
Yeah. Also, you sent me a letter that you got from NASA. What? I understand you're working a lot with projectiles and flight and thinking about this stuff all the time. What are you doing talking to NASA, and why are they responding to you?
Well, we've got this mass of people, the same group, most of them sponsored by industry, if not all of them, who say, oh no, you have to test against a uniform medium. What I used was outcome-driven testing. So one day I was just sitting and I got to thinking and said, okay, I'm going to ask NASA about it. So I asked them why, with all of the technical capability they have, the engineering, access to computer modeling with even with supercomputers, and considering the cost of launching a rocket, why do they still do test flights? And they sent me a nice reply back, very long reply. But the bottom line in it, I can't remember the exact wording, but it was to the effect is the only way you can know how it's really going to perform is to actually fly the rocket.
And I've got that letter right here, so I'll give the exact words. No amount of simulation and lab testing can assure actual performance.
Yeah.
And that's something else that I think it's really important for people to realize. We can do our best with all of the data that we can possibly get, but when we're working in this space of shooting animals with arrows, each individual test is going to be different. We cannot have a control to the experiment. All we can do is get enough data points that the law of large numbers ends up tilting to our favor, and that's it.
That's basically what outcome-driven studies are.
Yep.
They're used a lot in medical community. That's probably where they're used the most. And people don't question the drug testing that's done, but yet they'll question what I'm doing. Now, my primary database, which is looking strictly at comparing penetration, has a little over 5,000 shots. That doesn't include all of the focal studies I did, like looking for the heavy bone threshold. That was over a couple of thousand more shots. Looking at the effect of different broadhead tip time.
What is the heavy bone threshold, sir?
I was looking for what arrow system it took to breach the ribs on buffalo at 100% frequency. Now, I wasn't looking at post-breaching penetration. That's really one of the places where I first noticed that the higher FOCs arrows penetrated more post-breaching. But that wasn't the purpose of the heavy bone threshold test. And, I started with lots of different arrow systems and weeded them out. Ones that didn't perform, wouldn't get through. And I kept looking for that point, that arrow system that would get through the bone, not necessarily how much it penetrated past it, but would get through the bone 100% of the time. And we ended up with a very specific parameters. You've got to have the structural integrity, the perfect fly, all of that stuff. But you need an arrow that's somewhere in the vicinity of 650 grains weight. And you need a broadhead that has a mechanical advantage of at least 2.6.
Okay.
Now, it didn't matter if it was single bevel or double bevel. As long as it met the mechanical advantage requirement, it would get through the bone. But I noticed that the single bevels were giving me much higher post-breach penetration.
And we're considering breach to be
the
hide fascia and ribs
through the bone.
Okay. So once we're inside the thoracic cavity, then breach has occurred.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the entire head has to pass through the bone to consider the bone breach. Otherwise, it was stopped by the bone.
Okay. So this is where you found that the single bevel has the advantage because of the torque that it creates.
No, that's where I noticed it.
That's where you noticed it. Okay.
Then I started trying to find the why it's doing this. And I did, I test after test after test looking at it. And the best thing I ever came up with was that dogged potato test. I had a short piece of shaft on a roller bearing, and I would put a single bevel head on it, spray rotating. I'd hold the bearing and push it through the potato, and it would rotate to split the potato. And I could do a double bevel. It would go straight through. 3 blade, straight through. 4 blade, straight through. Not splitting the potato. But the single bevel will split that potato every time.
I've got to go try this. I just picked some potatoes out of my garden yesterday.
Yeah. And Be careful you don't cut yourself.
Yes, sir. I'll do my best. I'll do my best. No promises, but if I do, it's on me.
Yeah. Troy says he just holds the back of the shaft and pushes it. And he says you cannot stop that broadhead from rotating.
Yeah.
But I used it on a free roller bearing because I wanted it to be where nobody could say I was twisting the air.
Gotcha. Interesting. Okay. Well, I've got to try this. That's exciting. That's an experiment everybody can do at home. So
yeah,
we
Troy's
talked
got
about
a video of it on his channel.
Okay. So we talked about aeroflight, and we're starting to talk about actual broadhead edge. Tell me about cut on contact versus like chisel tips.
The cut on contact slices through with minimal resistance. The chisel tips take a lot of force to get through. Now, one thing that's not in the factors there overtly is broadhead skip angle and things like that. Broadhead skip with those chisel tips is terrible. It varies. When I did the tip design test, that was another focus study that I found what worked best. Both on direct impacts and angular impacts. What gave you the best likelihood of the tip of the broadhead biting into the bone so it could initiate bone penetration.
Okay.
If we're talking about edges and edge finish, the edge finish, the smoother you can make it, the less resistance it has cutting through the tissue. Also, the thinner you can make it, you have, whether it's double bevel or single bevel, you're going to have a thinner angle in there. So in order to get a thin angle on a replaceable blade, they make the blades really thin. On a single bevel, you reduce the angle of the bevel. But reduce that angle of bevel also gives you more torque when it rotates. The amount of force that it rotates with is derived not from the air itself, but on tissue pushing against that single bevel.
Because
So
you have a
the
high
harder the
pressure and a
tissue
low
you go
pressure
through,
side.
the more force it rotates with.
Yep. Okay. So what angle of the actual broadhead edge did you find was ideal?
That's going to depend on the steel that the broadhead is made from.
Okay. I see a lot of them that are like 440 stainless and similar steels.
You have to watch. It's a careful dance. With the original Grizzlies, 25 degrees was as thin as I could go without having damaged edges, loss of structural integrity of the edge. Some of the stainless steels, even at 30, 32 degrees, tends to chip.
Okay.
It's too hard. Others perform well. Others are too soft, and the edge has a tendency to roll over.
Okay. So it's going to vary from one broadhead to the next, but
Yes.
would you say between 25 and 35 degrees as a general rule?
Optimal if you can stay there.
Okay.
What we're looking at there is the clotting cascade. The thinner, smoother, and sharper you can get your broadhead, the better. Now, the inner lining of the wall of the blood vessel releases the enzyme that reacts with tissue fluids to initiate the clotting cascade. So the more of those cells you damage, the faster it's going to clot. So if you can get a very smooth, and smooth is important, thin, sharp angle going through there, it does the least damage to the lining of the blood vessel. So it gives you the maximum amount of hemorrhage you can get.
Okay. And what we're really doing, the way that these animals are dying, is with a mechanical process where this broadhead is cutting blood vessels, and as that animal bleeds out through those blood vessels, its blood pressure drops, it faints, and no longer can get oxygen to its brain through the vascular system, and it dies. Like that's how we're killing them.
You know, other than hitting a nerve center.
Right. Which is not what we're trying to do with archery.
No.
And so when you're talking about smoothness, are you thinking about like the grit of the belt or stone that you're
want it highly polished.
Okay. Interesting. Because very few broadheads that are made by factories have a polished finish on them. Most of them have a pretty coarse finish that is just
what you need to do, and they're not expensive.
Yep.
Is buy you a USB microscope, so that they're like $20, so that you can look at that, see it up on your computer screen in detail, and see how rough it is and how rough the edge is. Whether the edge still has little tiny projections of steel sticking up. That's where stropping the edge comes in, to take off that little wire strip of metal along the edges.
Okay.
Now, I was fanatical on that. My finished stone was a ruby stone. Now, pocket-sized ruby stone today it'll cost you about $120. But it's darn fine. It's a lot finer than hard Arkansas.
Well, we can get lots of abrasives through companies like WorkSharp for much less money that will do a really good job, and
they would do a good job. I have never used them in my arrow shop sharpening, but I used a lot of them in gunsmithing.
Yep. Okay. Well, after broadhead sharpness, we kind of move on to arrow mass, which you've touched on a little bit. You said in the vicinity of
this is where we get into kinetic energy and momentum.
Okay.
The heavier your arrow is, all else being equal, shaft flex, shaft diameter, broadhead, everything else equal, the heavier that arrow is, the deeper it's going to penetrate. Kinetic energy is the total energy carried by the arrow. It has no direction.
Right. It's just a
vibration,
moment.
The sound. Yeah.
It's just a snapshot of a moment.
That's it. Momentum it does have a direction. And in our case, it's the forward force of the arrow. Now, you've got to remember that when that arrow hits, you're going to have some arrow flex. I don't care how good you get it. Well, we've tried. You get it to the minimum, and it helps you. But you're not going to get it perfect. So as that arrow wiggles a little bit, you're going to have multiple force vectors. But what you're trying to do is keep the major force vector straight forward for the arrow. And momentum is simply mass times velocity. As the arrow penetrates, you're going to lose velocity. The mass remains constant. So the more of your momentum that's invested in the mass of the arrow, the longer the impulse of force is going to be. The longer that arrow is going to be pushing forward.
That
And
makes
that's what
sense.
you're looking for, is a long impulsive force.
Yep. So another way to think about momentum is momentum shows us how much force is required to stop a moving object.
Exactly.
Yep.
And a factor that comes into that, not discussing any of that stuff, is that as velocity increases, I'll put it in a simple term, if you double the velocity at impact, you have increased tissue resistance. How hard the tissue pushes back against you by a factor of 4.
Okay.
That's why we see trad bows giving penetration, lightweight trad bows even, giving penetration not that far behind compounds.
Okay. I know this to be true, but let's try to make it make sense, because on its face, that doesn't necessarily make sense that if we increase velocity, that will increase resistance. But what is it about that tissue that is doubling the resistance anytime you double, or quadrupling resistance every time you double velocity?
Basically, most of the tissue, muscle, things like it, can be considered fluid tissues as far as penetration dynamics. Now, bone is a little different. It's called a viscoelastic material. The harder you hit it, the greater its resistance force gets. So it would not only get this 4 times increase you're normally going to get, it's going to have a higher resistance to a high-speed impact. So the lower the velocity you impact it with, it's actually easier to penetrate bone. Now that's talking about fresh, living bone.
Right.
Not a bone that's been in your freezer for a day, or when you've left out in the sun until it was completely dry.
And the same thing does happen with these more liquid type of tissues like organs and muscle. And a way that I would try to describe that to people is imagine just stepping into a pool, right? Very, very little resistance. But if you jump off of a high dive or off a cliff into the water, it hurts, right? So that higher velocity gives you higher resistance as you hit that material.
Yeah, the simple way is, I know the Army did some of their testing back in the 50s in their demonstration. They filled a big bucket with water, shot it with an M1 Garand, and the bullets in the bucket. Shot it with an arrow, and the arrow came out the other side of the bucket.
Yeah,
I've got that video saved somewhere, but
that's
I think it's done in
another great example. Yep, another great example. Okay, we're going to be killing potatoes in buckets before the end of this thing. I'm excited about it. Okay, talk to me about shaft diameter. Does shaft diameter matter?
Yes. The shaft diameter needs to be smaller than the ferrule of your broadhead. The ferrule of the broadhead should be the widest thing on your arrow. Not even having a shaft equal to it. Ideally, you want it about 6% or more smaller.
Okay.
And there's an increase in penetration.
And
Another focal study.
Yeah, 6% is really easy to achieve. You know, if we go from 5 millimeter to 4 millimeter, that's a 25% decrease in diameter. So 6%, that's very easy to achieve in a reduction.
It's not big. It doesn't need to be big. You know, we didn't have micro diameters when I was testing, but when I went from shafts that were 6% on down to ones that were, I don't know what they were off the top of my head, 15% or so, there was no difference in penetration. When I used the same arrow setup, same weight, same shaft material, everything's the same broadhead.
Yeah. You know, I've heard some criticisms of single bevel, stepping back a little bit, from some very smart people in the archery industry. But I disagree with him. But the criticism is oftentimes stated is that a single bevel edge is unsupported, and because of that, it's weaker. Now, I don't really know what unsupported means in this case, and if I go
They're talking
outside
about
of my
it doesn't
studio,
have a bevel on the other side.
yeah,
It's
if
not
I
a triangle.
if I go outside my studio and take a left and go over to where all my woodworking stuff is, every single cutting surface that is used for wood is single bevel.
Yes.
And if I keep going and I look at the chisels that I use for rock and hard things like that, they're single bevel too. And I can run a chainsaw in the woods for days on end without ever having to sharpen that thing, provided that I don't hit a rock or a piece of metal. And those are little soft steel single bevel edges. So
Yes.
single bevel is plenty tough, and it can get plenty sharp. Some of the sharpest knives that you can find are going to be single bevel sushi knives.
That's right.
So I think we can probably logically put that to rest and say, yes, it can get just as sharp as you need it to be, and it's plenty strong to stay sharp.
If you find it's a single bevel is fragile like that, being quote unquote unsupported, and I shouldn't have said the double bevel's a triangle and the single bevel's not. Single bevel's a triangle too, but if you're not getting that, it's because your steel is not the right steel or properly tempered steel, or your bevel is too low. If you get that narrow triangle, not an equilateral triangle like a double bevel, but that narrow triangle of a single bevel, yes, it's supported by the other side of the triangle. It's just that support is straight up and down. It's not angled in.
Right. Yeah, they're both wedges,
Yeah.
but it's just a little bit different. And if you want to lift a building, you're going to use a wedge that has a single bevel edge, because the mechanical advantage of that is just incredibly powerful.
Yes, I think that came up, I remember right, in video I did with Troy and Stephen Payne.
Okay.
He works in orthopedic surgery.
Yep.
And he said they do have some single bevels for certain things.
Oh, do they?
You never want to break a bone with a single bevel.
Right.
Because it will split. When they're deliberately breaking a bone away, they use a double bevel because it does not split.
Okay. Well, that's a pretty powerful piece of evidence right there.
Yes.
Now, since you've published all this, your studies have been spread far and wide. Are there any ways that you feel like it's been misinterpreted?
Well, I think most of the misinterpretations are things average bow hunter didn't understand. And I think the vast majority of them never read through the whole study because it's a tremendous amount of data. And so that's where and those are honest when people come up with something there. But that same group of influencers look to cherry pick the data deliberately to try to find something, anything that they can talk about. And of course, their followers are saying, oh, okay,
Yeah. Okay. So what's an example of something that you feel like has been misinterpreted, and let's take this opportunity to try to put it to rest?
There have been so many. Probably the most misunderstood has been the heavy bone threshold. As a matter of fact, Troy and I just recently did a video talking about the heavy bone threshold. And sure enough, somebody went back and, when we did that video, I said, I quit. No, it was one on why I quit using the compound. And I said, I quit using the compound when it got to the point that I was getting too many shots that would break the skin on the offside. And I said, wasn't getting any pass-throughs, just breaking the skin on the offside. And the longbows I were testing with was either sticking in the offside rib or breaching the offside rib. Some of them reaching the skin, but not breaking the skin. What I didn't do, and they found where I had put it in one of our newsletter updates. And, I was talking about the same thing, and I said, we had a point with compounds that we were getting exit wounds and pass-throughs. And we did. But when Troy and I were talking about it, we were talking about the terminal part of why I had to give up the compound. Now, we started out testing with adult female buffalo, young buffalo, and trophy bulls. And yes, we got to the point with the best arrow system I could come up with that I was getting pass-throughs on the female buffalo and getting pretty consistent exit wounds with the compound on young male buffalo. But I was also getting some pass-throughs with the longbow on those animals. So when I was talking to Troy on there, I was talking about the final phase of why I just had to give it up. We had gone to testing on nothing but trophy-sized bulls. And we never got past through there. And so somebody went back and, here's a contradiction. You said here it was, you got pass-throughs. When you were talking about it on the video, you said no pass-throughs. Well, that's the reason I didn't say it.
Yeah.
We weren't talking about that phase of the testing. If they'd look at the heavy bone testing, well, even the penetration testing, not the heavy bone testing, starting in about late 2007, I started testing all the way down with a 54-pound longbow. Now, I started out testing with Lady, the 94-pound longbow that I'd hunted with for 20 plus years. And all the Cape Buffalo stuff was done with that. And then I dropped down. Now, I had other bows around that. I had 85-pound bows. I had 100-pound bows. I think I had 196-pound, all longbows. When I started doing the Asian buffalo, I started out with an 82-pound longbow. But at the same time that I had to give up the testing with the compound, I also had to step down in power of the longbow because I was getting some exit wounds. The reason is I can't compare penetration data once an arrow breaks the skin on the other side because I've changed penetration medians.
Okay.
Now, my best arrow setups were used every time I did a penetration test because they were the benchmark against which I judged the other arrows.
Right. They become your control
They were
group.
retested every time.
Yep.
And as we got a better system, that became the benchmark.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about velocity. We've stated that there's some ideals in these other categories. Is there an ideal velocity if we're shooting this arrow that's in the vicinity of 650 grains?
In hindsight, I wish I'd done it. At the very end of my testing, I did some testing with a 40-pound recurve target bow, a Bear Formula Silver. That was 47 at my 27-inch draw. I wish I had put a 650 grain arrow in there. But I also wanted my over heavy bone threshold arrows too high, have high FOC. So I ended up with arrows that were about 723, 725, somewhere in very close to 725. And then I had matching, external dimension matching, below threshold arrows. And with the penetration maximized arrows, these high FOCs, ultra high FOC, well, none of them are ultra. All of them were high FOC in the 25% range. Gave lethal double on penetration with a 40-pound bow. Those arrows were launched at a massive 119 feet per second.
119. So
and they weren't going up against the 100% weren't anyway. Some did.
Yeah.
Reached the ribs on the offside, but they all reached double lung penetration.
Something that I talk about is the mediastinum quite often, and I feel like this is the most important part of the animal that we should be aiming for.
Yes.
And most hunters have never heard of it. Most people have never heard of it, but I've talked about it a lot, and I'll continue to. But the mediastinum is an organ that separates the two lobes of the lungs. It connects to the spine and to the diaphragm and to the sternum, and then it encapsulates the cardio system. So it has all the major blood vessels and the heart encapsulated in it, and it is most available only on a perfect broadside shot. And anytime you start to angle, then you have less mediastinum to aim for. So
yes,
I've found that if we can pierce mediastinum, then that is really what we're calling a double lung shot, and inevitably it is. But I feel like that is the big domino. That's what causes the collapse of the entire system.
Yes, and that's the same location. If you look at what Troy's talking about, straight up the shoulder, middle of the vital lead, you're going to be close to that. If you look at Kevin Robertson's books, any of them on the perfect shot, he says, same thing, primary position, leg straight down, come straight up the leg into that vital lead. You want to take out the vessels above the heart.
Yes.
That's better than a heart shot.
Yes, I agree.
That's the quickest kill you're going to get, with the possible exception of the femoral artery. I've had some great luck with that one. Now, I wasn't trying to shoot it deliberately, but the animals do get a vote where that arrow hits.
Yes, they do.
And I was a stalking hunter. I had to take shots from angles that most people wouldn't. And that's why I hunted everything with my buffalo arrow. It would go through. I was going to get the penetration I needed.
Well, one of the things, Doc, that I talk to people about, and I'm curious about your take on this, is rather than referencing off of the legs, which are problematic,
because the leg isn't always straight down. Yes.
Yeah, they move around, and they're exterior. So what I ask people to reference on, especially on elk, which is my specialty, is the highest point of the hump of their shoulder. And regardless of the angle that the animal is at, the highest point of the hump on the shoulder is always going to be your left and right.
Yes.
And then we come a third of the way up the body. And that's our spot. And that forces people to think about shooting to the center point of the animal rather than thinking of them as a two-dimensional target where they're picking a spot on the outside.
Now, one of my big complaints about most people is that they don't take the opportunity when they're dressing to look at not only the damage their arrow or bullet did, but the placement of internal organs. But you've got to remember, if you've got that animal down on the ground laying on his side, the organs are going to fall up in the body. What you want to look at is the path of your projectile and what organs did it hit. Then you have a really reference point. What I did was I aimed at internal organs that I couldn't see. But I can only do that because I had a really good understanding of animal anatomy.
Yeah.
So I never was picking a spot on the outside of the animal. I was shooting for that shot over the top of the heart. Didn't care what angle it was at.
I firmly agree. You'd be proud of the fellows in Northern Australia. I hunted down there for water buffalo and pigs and some other species here a couple years ago. It was a tremendous adventure. But those guides would go out with a battery-powered Sawzall in their pack, and every single animal, they would take that Sawzall, cut away the ribs, pull them back, and they would do an inspection as to what was actually cut and what was actually hit.
I would be very proud of them. You know, I found the Australians to be way more open to doing this stuff than American hunters are.
They really are. And they're bow hunting all year long.
Yeah, because, gun hunting is pretty restricted down there. Gun ownership.
And they get to hunt all year long because they don't have seasons or bag limits.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for most hunters here in the States, we've got a really narrow season where, if you're lucky, you're going to get one animal or two a year that you can even look at, and that's just not enough to get enough data points to actually be actionable. It becomes very emotional and very anecdotal. So I love seeing that, and I learned a lot while I was there, and it gave me better questions to ask about what was happening back home. But I think for most species, the highest point of the shoulder is going to sit directly above the heart, and it cannot move around. So if it's slightly quartering to you, slightly quartering away, if it's straight up facing you, or if it's straight up facing away, the top highest point of that shoulder is going to sit right above those blood vessels on the top of the heart. And what I like about cutting those blood vessels in particular is the heart continues to function, and it pumps all that blood out of their body into their chest, and it doesn't allow that blood to contaminate meat with all those endorphins and stuff that the animals kick and lose. So you get better food quality out of the animal.
Just as a point of curiosity, have you ever noticed the amount of bloodshot tissues you sometimes get with single bevels?
Yes, sir, I have. It looks like they've been hit by a 300 Win Mag sometimes.
Yeah. I've got some unbelievable photos of animals with massive amounts of bloodshot tissue from single bevel broadheads. Never see that with a double bevel.
A criticism that a lot of people have about single blade broadheads, whether they're single or double bevel, is that they say, well, I don't get enough of a blood trail. And that one's always confusing to me, because if you shoot these critters well, you're not relying on a blood trail because they go a very short distance and die.
Yes, and if the arrow passes completely through, it doesn't alarm the animals as much. And that's particularly true if you're shooting a very quiet bow, and your heavier arrow makes the bow quieter regardless of what you're shooting. But my longbow with heavy arrows on it, it's the quietest of all bows.
Yes.
It's not. It's a dull thud. The string never touches a limb.
Right.
It doesn't touch anything else. So all you got is vibration of the string. And I used to use, what were they, about 1/4-inch rubber bands that I would tie at one of the nodal points on the string. And that really made it just
Interesting. Well, Doc, if people want to read your entire study, if they want to read any books that you've written or support you in any way and show gratitude for this massive amount of work that you've put into this, how can they do it?
Well, of course, they can always donate to the foundation. It's a 501c3 nonprofit. We have everybody that works there, works with us, is non-salaried. 100% of whatever they donate is going to go to testing. Now, testing has become very expensive now. Rob's doing most of the testing and doing it with a compound. We're trying to repeat a lot of the stuff with an 82-pound compound. But we have to buy the buffalo now. They don't have that free access I had.
Right.
So it gets rather expensive trying to test. And you know what equipment costs now, particularly the premium stuff.
Yes, sir.
So we face a lot of expenses, don't get nearly enough money coming in. If it weren't for the board members, foundation wouldn't exist right now.
Okay.
We don't have enough funds coming in to be sustaining.
And
now,
what
they
is
could read
what is
all
the
of
name?
my reports and several of my articles. If they go to the foundation website, it's just Ashby Bow Hunting, all one word, .org. And go to the reports section, and it'll be my reports plus Rob's reports. Although he's got 2 more recent reports that, he has to make a living. He hasn't had time to write up. He's in the oil and gas business, and it's booming now. So he is extremely busy. So those will be coming whenever he got time to write them up. And I do have one book, but it's not about the study, things like that. And it's all written in the third person, which some people like and some don't. But it's interesting stories, and I try to tie all of them in with things that people need to know. And it's available on Amazon. All the profits from it go to the Fisher House Foundation. If you're not familiar with that, it's an organization that pays the expenses so the family of our severely wounded soldiers can be with them. I get very emotional about that. It's close to my heart.
Well,
but the book is just called, they can just look my name up and it will come up.
Okay.
But it's now Ramblings from the Old Derelict Bow Hunter.
Okay. Well, I've seen the benefits of the Fisher Foundation firsthand, and I've seen those families who otherwise couldn't afford to be able to go visit those troops who were wounded, and it makes a tremendous difference for everyone involved. For those troops who are wounded, for those families, very, very important work, and I can't thank you enough for being so selfless and doing that. Yeah. Well, as soon as we get off here, which is going to be in just a couple moments, I'm going to make a donation to the Ed Ashby Foundation and order your book. And I look forward to both of those things. Sir, I'm so grateful for your work and for your time. And yeah, it has changed. It's changed the way that I bow hunt. It's changed the way that my clients bow hunt, and it's helped us recover more animals. Elk are a tough critter.
He's the toughest animal in North America, for my 2 cents worth.
Yeah.
Moose and bear are soft animals.
Elk are dang tough, but if you shoot them well and you shoot them with the right system, they're not tough to that, and they die nice and quick, and then you've got some really terrific meat on your hands. So again, you've got all my gratitude for your work and for your time here today, and I just can't tell you how much I appreciate you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, sir. Well, I hope you have a great day, and everyone who's listening, I hope this information helps you understand how you can be more lethal if you're going up against big critters with a bow. Thank you to everyone who has taken the time out of their busy lives to write a review for the show and share it with their friends. I'm extremely proud of how intelligent, engaged, and adventurous this audience is. Original music for the Six Ranch podcast is written and performed by Justin Hay. Art for the Six Ranch podcast was created by John Chatelain and digitized by Celia Harlander. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.